All right. Thanks a lot, Neil. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Good evening to all of you people. Thanks for joining in. It's We are equally excited to conduct this webinar on geometry. This is the fourth webinar in this sequence of webinars that we've been conducting. The previous webinar that we conducted was on algebra, and I see a few names, names that I saw in the previous session as well. That's nice to know that a lot of you are finding value in these webinars, and we would like to continue adding a lot more value to your GMAT preparation. Yeah, so as we always do, we start off with a quote, and yeah, for today's, generally for a math session, I tend to pick a quote that I feel will reinforce some kind of positivity in the attendees, right? Because paradoxically, math is that kind of a subject that we always tend to look at the subject from a negative lens. So let's remember that even a broken clock shows the correct time twice a day. Let's not be too hard on ourselves when we get a math question wrong. Let's all remember that this is a learning curve, and mistakes are actually stepping stones for us to achieve success at a later stage, right? So let's begin on that note, on a positive mindset. This is especially required for a module like geometry, because geometry is that module in maths which is perceived to be difficult by a lot of test takers. Probably has to do with the kind of experience we had with geometry in school, and more so in high school, wherein geometry was filled with a lot of theorems and proofs and constructions and geometry boxes and protractors and compasses. Um, yeah, it does leave a good taste in one's mouth for people who enjoy geometry, but for some others, geometry could have been a hard nut to crack. So that's why it's more important for us to start off on a positive note, with a mindset that tells us, all right, this is a new start on geometry, and this is a chance for me to look at the topics in geometry from a fresh perspective. That's all. That's what I keep telling in all my webinars, right? So by the end of the next 60 minutes, you will understand the importance of visual reasoning for GMAT geometry. Okay, so GMAT geometry, geometry on the GMAT quant section is not as significant as maybe an arithmetic or an algebra in terms of number of questions, is what I mean. I'm not saying it's not an important module. I'm not saying that you can leave it alone, you can let it go, right? But in terms of number of questions, it's probably, the significance is probably lesser, okay? If you compare it to, let's say, an arithmetic or an algebra. You can get about 3 to 5 questions on an average from geometry, whereas from algebra and arithmetic, you'll get a lot more than that, right? But the kind of geometry tested in the GMAT is not the geometry entirely that we learned in school, right, in high school. Yes, it is based on high school geometry, but there are a few other components that you have to be good at to do well in geometry questions on the GMAT. One of them is what is called as visual reasoning. How you deal with diagrams, how you deal with figures. So that's one important learning that is going to come out of this session today. How to leverage your visual reasoning skills to do well in geometry. And if your visual reasoning skills are not good, how to develop such skills. That's one thing that is going to be a takeaway. How to deal with geometry data sufficiency questions. Very important, because data sufficiency itself is a problem area for a lot of test takers. When you combine it with geometry, it becomes a double whammy. So you definitely need strategies to deal with geometry DS questions. That's something we'll discuss in a little more detail a little later. And in my experience of having taught a lot of GMAT test takers, when it comes to geometry, I've heard a lot of them saying, Arvind, I face trouble with coordinate geometry, right? That's one subtopic that comes up very often, very often when people quote geometry. So that's an area that I like to touch upon as well. So what is the importance of working with diagrams in coordinate geometry? Right, that's something which will be the third takeaway for you. And all these takeaways could be, yeah, you can clipboard it on a board and have a look at it whenever you solve geometry questions. All right, so a quick overview of GMAT geometry. As I said, the topics tested here will definitely be from high school level geometry, right? So people who took up non-science subjects after 10th, you don't have to worry that you have to like know about conic sections or locus. Those kind of topics are not tested on the GMAT. All the topics that you see here, lines and angles, polygons, triangles, all these are topics that you guys learned in high school, probably eighth, some of them in 8th standard, some of them in 9th. I remember learning basics of coordinate geometry in 10th, right? So that's what is tested in the geometry section. You'll get questions from these areas, nothing more, nothing less. But more importantly, as I said, geometry questions will not only test your ability to use the basic properties, they'll test your ability to interpret the diagram. As I was telling, there's a lot of scope for visual reasoning. So what does visual reasoning involve? It's a broad term, right? You need to break it down and see, okay, what are those components of visual reasoning that you need to be good at? A lot of geometry questions will not give you a diagram, right? So drawing a figure is part of your visual reasoning skills. Sometimes the figure will be given, you may have to maybe rotate it by a certain angle or redraw it completely, right? Using your own knowledge of geometry, making constructions, that's one more aspect of visual reasoning. Sometimes instead of making a construction, you might have to remove a part just to convert it to a different figure, right? Remove a side or remove an entire face, rotating a figure. So all these aspects are being tested in geometry questions. So it's just not brute force theorems and proofs and equations. Okay, this is equations. I mention equations because I see a lot of students going that way when it comes to coordinate geometry. Right, they tend to memorize so many formulas that they end up missing out on the visual reasoning aspect. Right, so this is what I want all of you to start off with in today's session. Remember that a lot of geometry questions can be solved correctly if you can improve on these aspects of your geometry skills. Okay, and that's what is tested on a lot of GMAT geometry questions. So therefore, there is no need to remember so many theorems. In fact, when you actually attend our geometry sessions, you'll understand that in a topic like triangles, right? We probably cover 2 or 3 basic theorems. One of them is the Pythagorean theorem. The second one is the basic proportionality theorem, and probably the third one is the midpoint theorem. Apart from these, we don't cover any other theorems. We focus on teaching you how to deal with diagrams and how to apply the properties that you know, right? So the first aspect of geometry is the basic aspect. You can expect questions on as simple a topic as lines and angles, right? What is covered under lines and angles? You can have a topic coming from a question coming from let's say parallel lines, or you can have a question on the concept of complementary supplementary angles or linearly adjacent angles, right? So as basic a concept like this can actually throw up a 600 level question, can actually throw up a 600 to 700 level question. And sometimes questions from polygons, questions on maybe a pentagon or a hexagon, how to break it up into smaller parts and then apply the properties. You can have 700 level questions on some of these topics. So you need to remember there are certain aspects that GMAT makes very clear. If you have gone through the official guide or the Quant Review book, in each of these books, you have a chapter called Math Review, right? I strongly recommend all of you here on this session to go through this chapter called Math Review, which is on the OG, which is on the QR, right? You will know exactly what is tested on GMAT geometry questions, exactly, right? It's pinpoint precise. Also, when you start off with the problem solving and data sufficiency questions in the OG or the QR, this chapter is there in the OG or the QR, all right? When you start off with the questions, there are certain caveats that GMAT puts. It says all lines mentioned in questions are straight lines, so you don't have to worry about curved lines, and all lines are in the same plane. And it also goes on to say angles are greater than 0. You'll never have a negative angle. The positions of the points. So if you have a question where there are 4 points mentioned, the positions, the order, all of these are actually as per mention. What I've observed is many students don't go through these small points, right? These small points actually will make a lot of difference in the way you look at questions, right? And GMAT also says that the figures need not be drawn to scale, right? So you cannot trust the figure all the time. So these are certain basic aspects you have to keep in mind when it comes to a topic like lines and angles. One is all the lines that are given in a GMAT question are straight lines. All of them are in the same plane. And the figures need not be drawn to scale. You have to look out for symbols. Geometry is a topic of diagrams and symbols. So when you're dealing with a topic like lines and angles, look out for explicit clues. If something is not given, don't assume it, right? Like for example, I'll ask you a few questions now, right? I want all of you to be as interactive as you can be, and tell me what you think is the answer, all right? Okay, let me try my best to draw a straight line. Okay, all right, so from your knowledge of geometry, what do you call CD as? What is CD known as? You can type your answers in the chat box. And yeah, don't be too worried whether your answer is right or wrong. I'm more worried about the attempts. CD is the transversal perpendicular. All right. Okay. Anything else? The altitude. Okay. All right. Anything else? CD is a line. All right. Then what is AB? CD. C for Charlie, D for Delta. CD is what I'm talking of. This one, right? Any other term that you guys have learned that you can use here? Perpendicular line segment. Okay. Any other term at all? Y-axis. I didn't hear any of you saying perpendicular bisector. Was that the term I was looking for? Okay. CD perpendicular to AB. All right. So did we see the perpendicular symbol? Did we see the symbol till now? We didn't, right? I didn't put the symbol till now, right? So I said AB is a straight line. Yes, I did mention AB is a straight line. I said CD, I didn't say anything about CD. I said AB is a straight line and asked you what is CD with respect to AB, right? Now a lot of you mentioned perpendicular. And this is exactly what I'm saying, right? You cannot assume that it is perpendicular just because it looks like a perpendicular line, okay? Unless you see this symbol, you cannot say CD is perpendicular to AB, right? Another point I observed some of you saying is CD is a line. No, CD is a line segment. A line has infinite length, right? A line is a collection of points that extends up until infinity on both sides. which means a line does not have a length. You cannot find the length of a line, right? Whereas you can find the length of a line segment, because a line segment is a small portion of a line, right? So a great example for you to understand the concept of line and line segment is for you to think of a number line, right? Now, if I ask any of you, how many values, how many numbers are there on the number line? How many numbers are there on the number line? Infinite. Exactly. Why? Because the line keeps extending till infinity on both sides, right? I mean, that you can't think of a better example to understand a line. Okay, and therefore you cannot measure the length of a line. Whereas, if I ask you what is the distance between, let's say, 0 and let's say a 15, you would readily say it is 15 units, correct? Why? Because you know that this is a small portion which you can measure. So a line segment can be measured. It has two end points, whereas a line does not have an end point, right? So these are small aspects that actually matter in some topics, right? You can't, especially in a topic like coordinate geometry, you can't replace the term line with a line segment. If the question talks about a line, you have to deal with a line, not a line segment, and vice versa. And unfortunately, that's where I see a lot of students tripping up. They end up using each other alternatively and they end up making mistakes. Okay? So, big learning for you here is to look for symbols and not to assume. And of course, one small thing that you can do is understand your basic knowledge of definitions. Yes, knowing definitions does matter, right? Knowing the important parts of a definition. All right. I'm not saying that you should open a geometry book and memorize the definition. All right. But you need to know the important constraints. All right. Let's ask you another question, right? All right. So I have an angle. Let's say AOB is the angle. I've drawn a ray OC. Okay. And the OC divides the angle into two parts. Let's say each part is represented as A and B. So angle A plus angle B will be equal to see, that's the point I was making. That's exactly the point I was making, right? Despite cautioning you that you cannot say anything, I saw some of you saying 90. Naman, you went to the extent of even saying 45 plus 45. I'm not sure. You probably have a you have a angle measurement tool in your eyes, but I don't have it. Neither of us have it. And unless you see the symbol, right? You can't say A plus B is 90, my friend. I mean, why can't it be 89.5, right? It can be 89.5, right? Sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Yeah, it can be 89.5. It can be 90.1. Right? So these are the kind of biases that you have to give up if you want to do well in geometry. And these are the kind of concepts that are tested on a lot of questions. These biases are like exploited by the GMAT to create trap answers. All right, one last question, right? Okay, so now what can I say about A and B? Are you sure? Absolutely sure? Okay, so why is it 180 this time? That's the point. We learned that any line on the GMAT is a straight line, right? So the moment you see a line with two arrows, it's a straight line. And you know that any two angles on a straight line, linearly adjacent angles, will always give you a 180 degree, right? So it's about knowing the properties well. If you know the property well, you'll be able to recognize something from the diagram. And if you do not know the properties in detail, up to the last detail, that is when you will fall for the traps. Okay. So even in a topic like lines and angles, it's important to know the basics. All right. Just to take an example, this point that I've made here, the last point, something that I've experienced people facing. So I'll probably shift back to the whiteboard again and create a figure. And I want all of you to tell me there's something that we can do about this situation, right? So what kind of a figure is this? It's a regular, okay, let me say it's a regular hexagon, all right? So let's say, let me make that point. Otherwise, it would be too vague for you to understand. Okay? So there's again, under polygons, there are regular polygons, there are irregular polygons. So there are some properties that you need to remember. What's a regular polygon, for example? So regular polygon is a polygon where all the sides are equal, right? Give me an example, please. Can we say a square is a regular polygon? Okay. Can we also say a rhombus is a regular polygon? Absolutely not. Absolutely incorrect. So that is why geometry is difficult. Geometry is all about knowing the small details, right? Many of you remember regular polygons as a polygon where all the sides are equal. That is incorrect. Half-truths are very harmful. A lot of you remember half-truths. A regular polygon is a polygon in which all the sides are equal and all the interior angles are equal. Only when both the boxes are ticked will your polygon become a regular polygon. Even if one of the boxes is not ticked, then your polygon will still remain an irregular polygon. Okay? So out of the square and the rhombus, the square is the regular polygon because in a rhombus, all the angles are not equal. All right? So that is the level of detail that you need to have in terms of knowing properties. Right? It's just about knowing properties. You have to know them. As I mentioned in my slide, nobody will ask you to prove that the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180. You're not in school, right? And GMAT is not a school test. That's why I keep saying, get out of school mode, get into GMAT mode. GMAT mode demands you to know the properties and apply the properties, right? So this is a regular, let's say this is a regular hexagon, okay? Whose sides are A. Now, how do I find the area of this hexagon? One is, of course, I can remember the formulas, right? But how many formulas will I remember? I need to remember it for a pentagon then, maybe a hexagon, maybe an octagon. So it becomes an activity which is memory based, right? And GMAT doesn't demand that. It doesn't say you have to have a super memory like a supercomputer. Yes, there are some basic equations you have to remember. But more than that, how are you using your visual reasoning skills, right? Is what is being tested. So in a regular hexagon, if you actually connect all the vertices to one point, okay, all the triangles that you get will be equilateral triangles. And I'm sure any of us can remember something about the equilateral triangles. The area of an equilateral triangle is root 3 by 4 into a square. Multiplied by 6 will automatically give you the area of a hexagon. This is what GMAT expects you to do on polygons. All right, and not remember formulas. Okay, but to break down the polygon in terms of smaller figures that you already know. Clear? So that's what you are required to do on questions in polygons. Basically, remember the properties and break down the polygon into smaller figures. All right, so How do you think we should solve this problem? Yes, please. So L1 is parallel to L2. So is there any symbol representing parallelism? Okay, so if this statement was not given, right? If this statement was not given, could I tell you L1 parallel to L2 in another way, right? I told you geometry is all about knowing symbols. So you need to look out for the two arrows, right? This is a symbol for parallelism. Instead of this statement, I could put these two arrows, okay, and tell you that the two lines are parallel. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can solve this question, right? One is you can use the properties of corresponding angles. So this angle, because these two lines are parallel, what is this line called? This line is called as the transversal, an answer that some of you gave me in one of the previous question, right? So because this is a transversal or the intersecting line, yes, correct. So these two angles will be the same because they are corresponding angles. So this angle will be 2x, and now we can use the property of the linearly adjacent angle. So we can say 2x plus 4y equal to 180. So obviously x plus 2y will be smaller than 180, so we can eliminate Charlie, delta, and echo. We can take 2 common, x plus 2y equal to 90, right? You need to actively eliminate options in geometry. Otherwise, you'll be stuck with a lot of options. That's one way. Another property we could have used is, we know that 2x will be equal to 2x. What property is this? So these two angles are vertically opposite angles. We know that vertically opposite angles are always equal. Now, whenever a transversal intersects a pair of parallel lines, we know that the co-interior angles, that is, the interior angles on the same side of the transversal, are supplementary angles, which means these two angles will add up to 180 degree. So even in a simple question like this is probably a sub 600 level question. Even in a question like this, there are multiple ways of getting to the answer. That is, if you know the properties well. So knowing the properties about lines and angles is important because you can get direct questions on these areas. So this is the first subtopic under geometry, lines and angles, polygons. What is the next subtopic under which you can get a lot of questions? The second subtopic is the bigger subtopic, a significant one. You can get questions on triangles, quadrilaterals, circles, and 3D geometry. When it comes to triangles, I always say there are like 5 different models under which you can, segregate the questions. So the questions on triangles that you'll see on the GMAT can be broadly classified into like 4 or 5 categories. One of them, the first one and the more common one, will test your knowledge of basic properties. Okay, so there can be a lot of questions on this model. The second model will test your ability to deal with the area of a triangle. The third one will be on specific types of triangles. It could be on equilateral triangles. It could be on right angle triangles. It could be on isosceles triangles. So these are the 3 common triangles that are being tested. Again, under right angle triangles, there can be 2 categories. There could be a 30-60-90 or a 45-45-90. So these are properties that you need to know. The fourth model could be similarity and congruency, right? So these are, again, topics that are tested. Similarity is tested more often. Congruency is rare, is far and fewer in between. So a lot of questions will come from the first, second, and the third model, right? Of course, for the first model, there is no discount. You have to remember all the properties, right? But in the second model, area of a triangle, what do you think? What is the formula for area of a triangle? What do you think GMAT expects you to do? Is it just half into base into height, or what other formulas can you think of? Right now, that is where I want to tell you that if you are dealing with questions on area of a triangle, this half into base into height is the only formula that I want you to know. Right? It's a very powerful technique. You don't have to remember Hero's formula. You don't have to remember the area of a formula in terms of the in radius, circumradius, x radius. All that is not required. If you want to solve questions on area of a triangle on the GMAT, the half into base into height formula is more than sufficient. So you need to leverage your knowledge of this formula and be flexible enough to use it in different ways, right? You also need to remember about the properties of the different types of triangles that I mentioned here, and similarity and congruency. So what is similarity? You tell me in simple terms, right? What is similarity in layman terms? Yes, please. I would like to know. Okay, angles equal. You're being when you say angles equal, right? You're being very technical. Both have similar features. Okay. I always look at similarity and say equality in shape, right? So can we say siblings are similar or they look similar? Can we say that? Siblings, brother and sister, look similar, right? That's similarity. I mean, that's the analogy I can give you. But if there are a pair of twins, will you say they are similar or will you say they are exactly identical? So that's congruency for you, right? So similarity is equality in shape. The shape should be same. Size is not important. Whereas congruency means everything should be the same. Shape, size, angles, sides, everything. Right? So similarity is about ratios, whereas congruency is about equality. And that's what you are going to be tested on when it comes to similarity and congruency. So it's an important aspect, similarity. One is understanding similarity is important. Second one, how to identify similarity is also important. Third, after identifying similarity, how do we use the properties or how do we use the results? That is important. And that is why a question on similarity becomes challenging, because you have to do all the three, one after another, right? So that's about triangles. When it comes to quadrilaterals and circles, properties, remembering properties is important. I'll ask you some questions now. Do you think a rhombus is a parallelogram? Okay, so people who said no, right? I saw some of you saying no, right? You know what you're saying? You are effectively saying an equilateral triangle is not a triangle, right? Because according to you, if it has some speciality, then it stops being a triangle. That's what you're trying to argue, right? And that's the direct result of just memorizing properties. You have to understand diagrams. You have to understand how a rhombus is formed. The basic figure for any quadrilateral or for a rhombus or a rectangle, the basic mother figure is the parallelogram. You have to understand that part. So quadrilaterals can be either parallelograms, okay? The different parallelograms. What are the different parallelograms? It can be a parallelogram itself, it can be a rhombus, it can be a rectangle. or it could be a square. Now I'll ask you the same question. Do you think a square is a rectangle? Okay. Thankfully, some sanity prevailed, right? So a square is definitely a rectangle, right? So these are the parallelograms you are going to be tested on. You need to know the properties of each of these figures. And you need to know the overlap. For example, which are the two parallelograms which have diagonals equal? For example, obviously they are the rectangle and the square, right? Only in these two figures, the diagonals are equal. Okay. Whereas in the rhombus and the parallelogram, the diagonals are not equal. On the other hand, which are the parallelograms where the diagonals bisect each other? All of them, exactly, right? All of them. Which are the parallelograms where the diagonals bisect each other at right angles? Okay, that's half truths again, right? Half truths again. That's the point. A lot of you don't remember some of these properties. It is a rhombus and a square. It happens both in a rhombus and a square. There is nothing that the square doesn't have. Square has all the properties. Now, which are the parallelograms where the diagonals bisect the vertex angle? See, I did not get an answer for that. I got an answer after a lot of time. The vertex angle is bisected in two figures, that is the rhombus and the square. Not in a rectangle, not in a parallelogram. See, this is the level of detail you need to know the properties, about parallelograms, about quadrilaterals. Okay, and the only non-parallelogram that is tested is a trapezoid or a trapezium. Okay, so a trapezium is a quadrilateral where there is only one pair of parallel sides. These two sides are parallel and these two sides are non-parallel. And there are no properties like diagonals bisect each other or the diagonals are equal. They may bisect each other, they may not bisect each other. They may be equal, may not be equal, right? So therefore, I mean, this is a level of detail that you have to get into when it comes to quadrilaterals. And similarly, circles, right? Coming to circles. So there is one property in circles related to chords, right? So let's say I have a couple of chords. Let's say AB is a chord and CD is a chord, all right? Let's say O is the center of the circle. So what happens if AB equal to CD? What can you conclude? What is the inference? Exactly. So the inference is equal chords are equidistant from the center, right? Now, how many of you remember this? A lot of you didn't, right? Equidistant from the center. So these are the kind of properties that you're expected to apply in questions. And if you don't know the properties, you'll find the going tough. Very often, a lot of students who complain geometry stuff are the ones who don't remember concepts. All right. So the first advice I would like to give you all on triangles, quadrilaterals, and circles is please make a list of the properties. Please write it down in a book, one below the other, right? And keep it handy. Whenever you solve questions on triangles or quadrilaterals or circles, just open the book, keep it handy. Try to just quickly glance through the properties and start solving, right? Just do a quick recap once for 5 minutes, start solving the questions. If you're stuck, go through the list that you've made and try to see what property can you use to solve a problem. All right. So how would you solve this problem? This is again a problem where I'm not giving you everything on a platter. I'm kind of making you work for it. I'm also testing your visual skills here. All right. And of course, your knowledge of properties. Go ahead. Try this. I'll probably try this along with you, right? Let's all do it together. So starting from town S, so let's say town S is here. Fred rode his bicycle 8 miles due east. So 8 miles due east. So this is my 8 miles. 3 miles due south. All right. So then I take a right turn. I travel 3 miles if I'm Fred. Then 2 miles due west. And then 11 miles due north. All right. So let's put the 11 here. So tell me, what is the distance from this point to this point? What is the distance, additional distance? Obviously, the total distance is 11, out of which this is already 3. So 11 minus 3 according to me should be 8 miles, right? How is it 10, guys? Think about it. No, it's just a basic calculation. And what do you think is this part? This part, how much will this be? My total distance from here, if you want, you can name the vertices, people. You can probably call this P, Q, right? R. And this you can call as U. And this is finally T, right? So SP is 8. So SU will be 6 miles. And because north, east, south, west are all perpendicular, correct? If you want to find the straight line distance, it becomes a right angle triangle. So 6, 8, and 10. So if you knew about the 3, 4, 5 right triangle, this question was just a piece of cake. The only time consuming aspect was the diagram was not given. Right? That is where your visual reasoning skills have to come into play. Right? So these are the kind of questions you can expect when it comes to questions on triangles and quadrilaterals and circles. They test your knowledge of properties. Now, the last part, and probably the most challenging part for a lot of us, is the topic of coordinate geometry. Okay, that's because coordinate geometry is like a marriage between algebra and geometry. You use algebraic principles to define geometrical objects. You use variables to define a point. You use an algebraic expression to define slope, right? Or you use an algebraic equation to define the distance. That's what makes things tough, interesting also at the same time. And many people think it is about remembering the formulas. But a lot of times, it's your ability to plot the diagram. That's what I've seen. People who plot better in coordinate geometry tend to do well. And people who depend on formulas tend to face a lot of difficulty. Because all questions will not test your knowledge of formulas. So tell me, when it comes to coordinate geometry, there are two lines. There are two important lines. So what are these lines called? The horizontal line is called as the x-axis, which is represented as x dash. And the vertical line is called as a y-axis, which is called as a y dash. Right? So taken together, they are called as axis, plural. AX, ES is like the plural of axis. So what are these x-axis, y-axis? Essentially, what are they? Anybody? What do they represent? No, a plane is incorrect. A plane is what you see in front of you. Your screen is a plane. How can a line represent a plane, guys? Yes, I understand. Horizontal line, vertical line in 2D, I understand. What do they represent? What are these lines? These are basically number lines, guys. X-axis is a number line and y-axis is a number line. Both of them have a common zero, right? What is that common zero called? The common zero is called as the origin, represented by O. So dealing with coordinate geometry is dealing with number lines. And all of you, I'm sure, can deal with number lines, right? So for example, what do you understand by saying 3, 2? What is the meaning of 3, 2? Where will you find this point? First of all, there are 4 parts, correct? So each part is called a quadrant. Which quadrant will you find this point in? And what does it mean? Okay, it's found in the first quadrant. Fair enough. What does it mean? How do you describe this? Let's say you have to explain this to a 6th standard student. You can't just say x equal to 3 and y equal to 2. He'll just give you a blank look. You have to explain to him that, look, this is like a town, right? A town in which you have roads running perpendicular to each other, right? And you can travel only in a straight line along the roads, right? So 3, 2 means you travel 3 blocks in the horizontal direction first, and then you travel 2 blocks in the vertical direction. So that is 3, 2. So what is this? This point, I'll probably use a different color. This point in red is a point that is how many units away from the y-axis? Y-axis. Guys, listen to me carefully. How many units? How far is this point from the y-axis? It is 3 units away. And how far is it from the x-axis? Correct. So what is the understanding? What does the x-coordinate represent? Now tell me. The x-coordinate represents the distance from the y-axis. And what does the y-coordinate represent? The y-coordinate represents the distance from the x-axis. This is the most important thing you have to remember in coordinate geometry. Remember, understand, and apply. If you are able to make sense of the coordinates, half your problems are solved on coordinate geometry. Okay, so for example, if I give you another point, let's say -4, 5, how do you describe this point? -4, 5. Where is it? Which quadrant? And how do you describe it? It's in the second quadrant. Fair enough. The point is at a distance of 4 units from the y-axis. You can't have -4 from y. You can say 4 from y to the left of y, correct? Okay. So 4 units from y, and how many units from x? 5 units from x. So this distance is 5 units, which means you walked 5 blocks. And this way you walked how many blocks? So this is 4 units. And because it is to the left of the y-axis, you'll have a -4. But because it is above the x-axis, you'll have a +5. Clear? If you can understand this part of coordinate geometry, as I said, half your problems are solved. Because it means that you can identify points, you can plot lines, and if you can plot lines, the other half of your problem is solved. All right, guys. So remember, coordinate geometry is just not about brute force remembering formulas. It's just not about distance formula, slope, intercept. It's about plotting points and lines. All right, so let's get into some examples now. Yes, I want to add a point here. You can get questions on circles sometimes in coordinate geometry, but again, you don't have to remember the equation. Questions on circles will test your knowledge of the properties of circles and the properties of lines, right? So you don't, even if you don't remember the equation of a circle, it is okay. And as I've put here in like small print, many questions can be solved by plotting figures. You don't even have to use equations. As you go ahead, as you solve more questions in coordinate geometry, you'll understand that. All right. So let's solve some questions now for the next 10-15 minutes. Shall we? Okay. Go ahead. First question. Since it is the first question, I'll give you a time of 2 minutes. I will launch a poll. I want all of you to answer the poll, answer the question using the poll only. I'll hold on for 2 minutes. Okay, guys, so that's 2 minutes and a little over. I'll probably hold on for another 10 seconds before I close the poll. A lot of you have probably guessed on this problem. All right, time up. I'm closing the poll now. End of poll. And yeah, unfortunately, the highest percentage here goes to Delta, 41%, which is unfortunately incorrect. All right, these are your results. But the 41% of you are incorrect. And I'm guessing that a lot of you, after the 1 minute point, probably just guessed it. It looks a difficult question, but you'll be surprised when I show you how it is solved. You'll be surprised by the simplicity of the solution. Okay. Now, we know that vertically opposite angles are equal. So can we say these two angles are equal? Are these two angles vertically opposite angles? Yes, they are, right? So let's call them A and A. Similarly, these two angles are equal. Let's call them B and B, C and C. So many times what happens, no, a lot of us get overwhelmed by the diagram itself. We are like, oh my God, what do I do with this diagram? This diagram itself looks intimidating. You can't get intimidated by the diagram. You have to do something. You have to do something that is under your control. If you were able to recognize that they are equal angles, you need to put that there with a variable, right? This is these two angles are equal. So how many triangles do we have in total? This is a pentagon, okay? How many triangles do we have? We have 5 triangles. What is the sum of angles of one triangle? 180 degrees. So what will be the sum of the angles of the 5 triangles? Clearly that will be 900, right? But how do I create an equation now? I just need to create an equation. So if I look at this triangle, right, what are the angles? I have x plus a plus e, right? So you'll observe that x, y, z, w and v, x, y, z, w and v will occur once. And what about the other alphabets, guys? What about a, b, c, d, e? How many times will you see them in the equation? Obviously, you'll have a twice, so 2 times of a, 2 times of b, 2 times of c, 2 times of d, and 2 times of e. All of these added up should give me 900 because there are 5 triangles, right? Now, if you observe the pentagon closely, what does this angle represent? What does the A represent? This angle. Okay, let me use a different color, right? Just to make sure that you understand. All right, so let me call this angle. This angle, what we call as, this is the exterior angle, exactly, correct? So how many exterior angles can I see? I can see 5 exterior angles. So what is the sum of the exterior angles of any polygon? The sum of the exterior angles of any polygon is 360 degree, which means A plus B plus C plus D plus E will be 360. So therefore, X plus Y plus Z plus W plus V, right, plus this whole thing should be equal to 900. Now 2 times of 360 is how much? 720. So if you subtract 720 from 900, your answer will be 180. So you saw I did not use any hi-fi properties here or hi-fi rules. I just used the basic property of vertically opposite angles, sum of the interior angles of a triangle, and sum of the exterior angles of a polygon. So I basically utilized the diagram to my advantage. Clear? All right, let's move on to the next question then. All right, this is the second question. So because it's the second question, you've all of you have kind of warmed up to this. I will give you 1.5 minutes on this, and that's also because we are kind of running out of time. Okay. Go ahead. I'll give you 1 minute, 30 seconds. That's 90 seconds. Take a stab and give me a best answer on the poll. Okay, people, that's almost 100 seconds now. I'll probably hold on for another 15 seconds and close the poll then. After that, we can discuss. Last 10 seconds. Okay, that's time. And yeah, we can close the poll now. Yes, please. Okay, 33% Delta, 29% Echo, 19% Charlie. Okay, what do you think is the trap answer on this question? Well, it's a very simple question on right angle triangles. You just have to know the right angle triangle properties. So what's an isosceles right angle triangle, people? So an isosceles right angle triangle is a triangle where one of the angle is 90. What about the other two angles? The other two angles are 45 and 45 degree each. So it's popularly known as the 45-45-90 triangle. Therefore, the sides opposite to these angles are equal. So A. So therefore, the hypotenuse will be A times of root 2 times of A. The question clearly says the perimeter. The perimeter of any geometrical figure is the sum of the sides. So we know 2A, 2 times of A plus A root 2 is equal to 16 plus 16 root 2. So a very common trap answer here that people get into is they say, okay, A root 2 is the hypotenuse, so 16 root 2 should be the hypotenuse. Now that is incorrect, right? Because you have to follow the Pythagorean theorem. You have to make sure that the triangle follows the Pythagorean theorem because it's a right angle triangle. Okay, so for a moment, all right, let us say A root 2 is equal to 16 root 2, all right? So what is the value of A? A becomes 16 because root 2 gets cancelled. Okay, so let's put 16 here, 16 and 16. All right, so 16 square is 256. 16 square is another 256. This is equal to 512. Now 16 root 2 whole square is also 512, so it is satisfying the equation. But what happens to the perimeter here? The perimeter will not be 16 plus 16 root 2, right? The perimeter becomes 32 plus 16 root 2, which is not correct. So if you were stuck on this question, you could have tried this. You could have tried, okay, let me check A root 2 equal to 16 root 2. A becomes 16. Let me check whether it satisfies the constraint. It clearly does not, right? So 16 root 2 is not your hypotenuse. So if A root 2 is not equal to 16 root 2, then clearly the other component has to be equal to 16 root 2. As simple as that. So A will be equal to 8 root 2. So 8 root 2 is one of the sides. 8 root 2 is one of the sides. So definitely 8 root 2 is not your hypotenuse. What is 8 root 2? 8 root 2 is 128. The other 8 root 2 is also 128. 128 plus 128 is 256, which is the hypotenuse. So square root of 256 will be 16. So the correct answer here is 16. B for Bravo is the correct answer. How many of you got it? Just about 14%. Right? So 8 root 2, guys, is not the hypotenuse. It is the length of the perpendicular sides. Any of you have a doubt, did not understand, questions, please ask. Don't feel shy. You're here to learn, and learning can happen only by asking questions or clearing your doubts. Okay, so So did you understand the part where I said A is not equal to 16? Is that part clear? All right. So I said if A root 2 is not equal to 16 root 2, I said 2A can be equal to 16 root 2. Is that clear? Okay. So if 2A equal to 16 root 2, A equal to 8 root 2, correct? Correct. What is A? What have we taken as A? A is the perpendicular side, right? So 8 root 2 is one of the perpendicular sides, and therefore the other perpendicular side is 8 root 2 as well. So what happens if you square 8 root 2? How will you square 8 root 2? Huh? This will be obviously 64 into 2, right? So 64 into 2 is 128. The other one is also 128. And therefore, the addition of the 2 should give you 256 under the root. So 256 under the root is 16. This is the equation, Naveen. This is the equation, right? So either this part should be equal to this part, okay, and this can be equal to this part. Only then the equation will satisfy. What is the other way? The other way is this can be equal to this, and this can be equal to this. We already proved that this is not happening. So obviously this has to happen. Naveen, understood? Okay, so I hope Naveen got it and you're still there. All right, guys, so it's almost 8:45. So I'll probably have to skip this question, right, because of the time constraint. I want all of you to like solve a data sufficiency question, right? I hope all of you are aware of data sufficiency. The options are given here below. You can look at the options. And because some of you may be new to this model, I'll give you 2 minutes to solve this question. I will not run a poll. I'll just hold on for 2 minutes. I'll not run a poll. Let me not put that pressure on you. You solve this question. If you have got an answer before 2 minutes, just hold on and post your answer only when I ask you to do that. All right, go ahead. Asa, I said hold on to your answer and post it only when I ask you to, because it will kind of distract the others, right? Anyways, no problem. Okay, guys, no problem, master. Okay, so what is the property that we need to use to solve this problem? Very often what happens is people tend to go to the statements. When you have a data sufficiency question, try to spend time on the question stem, right? The property that you need to use here is the difference of the sides, the difference of any two sides of a triangle is smaller than the third side. Right? So that's what we use here. Is that correct? What is the other property related to this? What is, there's another property similar, right? What is the property that gets used along with this? The other property is the sum of any two sides is greater than the third side. Okay, good. Okay, so what are the answers? How do we solve this? If ABC are the lengths of three sides of a triangle, okay, is A less than 3? So what is the question? Is A less than 3? That is the question. Okay, a lot of you are saying D for delta. Let's see, let's figure out. Yeah, D seems to be the popular answer, right? Okay, all right, fair enough. What do we do? First statement alone. C equal to B plus 3. What do I do from this? How can I reorganize? Yes, please. Okay, difference in C and B is 3. Okay, C minus B is equal to 3. Great. Okay, very nice. So we know C minus B is smaller than A, right? Or we can write it as A more than C minus B. And we know C minus B is how much? 3. So therefore A is more than 3. So is A less than 3? What's the answer? No. No is important. Very often in a yes no DS question, many of us will try to get a yes. Not necessarily. A no is equally good. Okay? So the first statement alone was sufficient to give us a definite no. What about the second statement? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, guys, this is a typo from my side, but I actually intended this to be B. All right. What do you think will be your answer if I like change this to B? Think about it. Will your answer change? Instead of A equal to 3, uh, my bad. I had to put B equal to 3. This is the only typo that I missed out probably. Okay, let's say B equal to 3, C equal to 6. What happens? B equal to 3, C equal to 6. Correct? So C minus B will be equal to 3. And that's the same equation we got in the first statement. If the first statement was sufficient, then obviously this will also be sufficient. The answer is D. So this is probably a 600 to 700 level question on the properties of triangles. The previous one that we solved on the right angle triangle is also a 600 to 700 level question, right? And the first question was probably a 700 level question. The very first question that we solved. And in all these questions, you saw that we do not use too many advanced properties. We used very basic properties. Therefore, it's important for you to remember your basic properties very well. All right. So what time is it? It's almost 8:50, guys. So I think we'll have to kind of wrap it up with this question, this one last question that I have for you, right? Yeah, I will give you a minute and a half. Take a stab at this. All right, and then we can discuss this. Go ahead. 90 seconds. Okay, so a lot of you are saying A for alpha. Okay, Vishal, A for alpha, Asta, Pooja, C for Charlie. All right, let me hold on for another few seconds. Oh, E for echo. Interesting. Okay, A for alpha, C for Charlie, B for Bravo. Wow. Hmm. D for Delta. Each of them alone sufficient. Interesting. So, a very important thing you have to remember about DS questions in geometry is if you have a data sufficiency question in geometry, you should get a unique figure or a unique diagram. Any information that gives you a unique figure or a unique diagram is sufficient information. Otherwise, it is insufficient information. The question is quadrilateral K a square? You can say, yes, it's a square. You can say, no, it is not a square. And what do you mean by saying not a square? What can it be? What is the meaning of saying not a square? What can it be? Can be a rhombus, can be a rectangle, can be a parallelogram, can be a trapezoid, can be just a quadrilateral, a general quadrilateral, right? That's how you understand the question. All right. Okay. All sides of K measure the same. Does this give you a unique figure? Does the first statement alone give you a unique figure? Why? Because there are at least two quadrilaterals where all sides measure the same. It can be a square or it can be a rhombus. In both the figures, in both the quadrilaterals, all the sides are same. So the first statement alone is not giving us a unique figure. Therefore, A for alpha and D for delta can be eliminated. Second statement alone, both diagonals of K measure the same. Does this give us a unique figure? No, it doesn't, because there are two diagrams in which the diagonals are equal. What are the diagrams? One is a rectangle, right? A rectangle is a quadrilateral in which the diagonals are equal. And the second one is a square. So using the second statement alone, we don't have a unique figure again. But how do we combine now? When we combine both the statements, we are looking for a quadrilateral where the sides are same and the diagonals are equal. Where does that happen? Obviously, in a rectangle, all sides are not equal. And in a rhombus, both the diagonals are not equal. So it happens only in a square. So when we combine both the statements, we definitely get a unique figure. And therefore, the answer here is C for Charlie. Combining the statements is sufficient, but individually they are insufficient. So when it comes to data sufficiency questions, you have to look for the diagram. If you get a unique diagram, the data is sufficient. Otherwise, it is insufficient. All right. Okay, guys. So I'll just skip this question because of lack of time. So summarizing certain things that I said today, if you want to do well in geometry, improve your ability to deal with the diagrams, improve your visual reasoning skills, right? Whenever you see a geometry question, try to draw a diagram. Even if the diagram is given, draw your own. That's how you can improve your ability to deal with diagrams. Memorize the basic properties of all the diagrams, triangles, quadrilaterals, circles, right? And certain standard polygons like the hexagon and the pentagon and the octagon. In DS questions, remember a unique diagram is necessary. Any information that gives you a unique diagram is sufficient, otherwise it is insufficient. In coordinate geometry, it's important to know how to plot points, how to draw lines, and not depend only on equations. And last but definitely not the least, remember geometry, mastering geometry or improving your confidence in geometry will take time. That's the nature of the beast, right? So don't be too hard on yourself. Take time, solve as many questions as you can, apply the properties, and as you do so, the properties will start getting memorized by themselves. I saw some of you asking me, can you give me a list of properties? As you attend the sessions in geometry, you will start, you can actually make a list of the properties yourself as we discuss the properties in class. All right. So I will hand it over back to my colleague Mir now. Mir, you can take over.
Hey guys. So just to end up the session right now, we would like to talk a little bit about Crackverbal, what we do. I believe a lot of you are people who have been coming back to Crackverbal sessions, so you know a little bit about what Crackverbal does. But yeah, as you can see on the screen, we have a bunch of different things that we do in terms of our GMAT preparation courses. We try to accelerate your overall preparation needs, and based on what your needs are, we have a always on support and support system that can help you out to reach your final goals. Yeah, so we believe that GMAT prep is not really like a glove that anyone can, fit into. There might be something that works for you. It might not work for someone else. So that's why we have a bunch of different variations in terms of the programs that we have. So the first one that you can see on screen is the GMAT on demand course. So this is a course where you can go at your own pace, learn at your own pace. These are recorded sessions. And again, with this comes weekly prepathons, which you can attend with, an instructor like Arvind. The second one is more around the lines of the session that we had today. It's the GMAT live at home session, a completely interactive session that similar to what you had today. And yeah, we'll have these usually over the weekend along with the prepathons that we have during the weekdays. Finally, we have the GMAT score up part, which is usually a one-on-one session. If you think that you are at a stagnation, say at a 650, 670 or 700, but you want to increase your score, but you want to probably have a one-on-one session with an instructor like Arvind, a mentor like Arvind. That is something that we also cater to. We help you with profile evaluation and everything else in between. Finally, we also have something called the GMAT official guide solutions. So this is unlike the official guide, which might be a little difficult to understand for a lot of people. Our mentors have taken this, digested it down into a very simple to understand set of videos that you can just watch and understand the official guide. We also offer application services, but I don't think we need to cover that at this point. But yeah, we have you covered from your GMAT prep to your final application. That's something that I think not everyone can say. Yeah, so in terms of what you get in the sessions in the program, we believe that it's not about bumping out a lot of different questions, a lot of different things in your face so that you just chuck them out. We believe that you need to have proper, structured learning that caters to both on demand and live versions of our course. So the human touch element is involved. You have 24/7 support facilitators who take care of whatever questions you have. And finally, all the resources that you need will be there in one single place that you can access anytime, anywhere. And we have a bunch of testimonial success stories from our students who have taken GMAT, who have gotten into top universities, including Ivy League, Stanford, Harvard, ISB, all of that. So if you would like to read more, I'm pasting the link in the chat, so you can probably refer to that link whenever you get the time. Yeah, finally, we have an upcoming session on GMAT geometry, a similar class, but it'll be more in depth about the different aspects that we covered today, and you'll probably learn a lot more. So if you're interested in joining this class, you can contact us completely for free. This is going to be a demo session, so you can contact our team, just send a WhatsApp message or just call up the number that I'm sharing in the chat. Also, in terms of the Kickstarter course, if you would like to get a flavor of what kind of course we have, what kind of material we have, everything unlocked. This is a Kickstarter course that can help you kickstart your GMAT prep no matter what stage you are at. So we can share that as well over here in the chat window. You can probably refer to that. Yeah, I think I missed sending the number. I'm just sending it again. So here you go. And yeah, it's on screen as well. So if you have any other questions, you can probably let us know as well.